The air inside the bustling international airport was thick with anticipation. Passengers shuffled through security, some dragging heavy suitcases, others clutching passports and boarding passes with excitement. Among them was Elena Vasquez, a high-powered executive who had spent the last 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder. Her impeccable designer suit, perfectly styled blonde hair, and air of absolute confidence made it clear she was a woman accustomed to getting her way. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Elena had just finished a high-stakes business meeting in Paris and was now en route to New York, where another critical deal awaited her attention. As she strode into the exclusive first-class lounge, her sharp blue eyes swept the room, ensuring that everything was as it should be. She loathed unnecessary delays, unnecessary pleasantries, and most of all, unnecessary disruptions to her meticulously planned schedule. The announcement for boarding first-class passengers rang over the intercom, and Elena rose, adjusting the silk scarf around her neck. She had no intention of waiting in line behind anyone. Just as she approached the boarding gate, a man in a casual hoodie and jeans, with a cap pulled low over his face, stepped forward as well. Elena frowned. The airline staff seemed oddly excited, whispering amongst themselves, their eyes darting towards the man. There was an unmistakable glimmer of recognition in their expressions, yet they held back from addressing him directly. She, on the other hand, had no such reservations. "Excuse me," Elena said sharply, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the strap of her designer handbag. "First-class passengers are boarding now." The man, who had been adjusting his bag, lifted his head slightly, revealing a familiar yet unassuming face. He smiled politely. "I know," he said simply. Elena narrowed her eyes. Something about him tickled the edge of her memory, but she was too irritated to care. "This is first-class boarding," she repeated with emphasis, expecting him to step aside. "If you're in the wrong line, you should wait for your group." There was a pause, and the airline attendant behind the desk looked stricken, as though she wanted to intervene but dared not. The man, however, remained composed. "I'm in the right place," he replied calmly, but there was a quiet amusement in his voice. Elena's lips thinned. She despised when people lingered, pretending they belonged where they did not. With a sigh of exasperation, she turned to the flight attendant. "Can we move this along? Some of us actually belong here." The woman at the desk hesitated, looking between the two of them. "Madam, this is Lionel Messi," she finally whispered, as if saying his name too loudly might cause an uproar. For a moment, silence hung in the air. The name echoed in Elena's ears, slowly piecing itself together with that tickling familiarity she had brushed aside. Then, like a sudden gust of wind, realization hit her squarely in the chest. Messi, as in Lionel Messi, as in the greatest football player in the world. The man who had won multiple Ballon d'Ors, led Argentina to glory, and was adored by millions. Elena blinked. The man she had just tried to dismiss was not just some passenger trying to sneak into first class. He was, quite possibly, the most famous athlete on the planet. A crimson flush spread across her cheeks, but her pride refused to let her back down. "Oh," she said stiffly, "I don't follow football." It was a weak defense, and she knew it. Messi, to his credit, merely smiled. He had encountered all types of people, adoring fans, harsh critics, and those who underestimated him at first glance. He had long learned that silence was often the best response. The flight attendant quickly stepped in. "Mr. Messi, of course, you're welcome to board first." Elena watched as Messi nodded in thanks and proceeded ahead without another word. By the time she reached her seat, Elena felt the heavy weight of humiliation settle over her. But the worst was yet to come. As she settled into her plush seat, she couldn't help but glance towards Messi, who was only a few rows ahead of her. The whispers among the other first-class passengers grew. People subtly took out their phones, snapping pictures, whispering excitedly about the football legend in their midst. The flight had barely taken off when the regret fully set in. As the flight attendants moved through the aisles, catering to the needs of first-class passengers, Elena found herself in an unexpected predicament. When her meal was served, the attendant accidentally spilled a small amount of sauce onto her sleeve. It wasn't much, but for someone like Elena, who prided herself on being flawless, it was an unforgivable offense. She immediately called over the flight attendant, irritation lacing her voice. Do you even know how expensive this blouse is? This is silk. Do you have any idea how hard it is to remove stains from silk? The young woman, visibly flustered, stammered an apology, offering club soda and napkins. But Elena's anger had already taken hold. This is why I expect a certain level of professionalism, she continued, her voice cutting through the hushed first-class cabin. I paid for this service and I expect to receive the quality that was promised. Before the situation could escalate further, another voice entered the conversation. Smooth, composed, but undeniably powerful. She made a mistake, Messi said, turning slightly in his seat to address Elena. It happens. You don't have to make her feel worse about it. The air seemed to freeze. Elena stiffened. The same man she had tried to dismiss at the gate was now stepping in, effortlessly dismantling her tirade. I don't see how this concerns you, she snapped, unwilling to surrender so easily. Messi merely shrugged. It doesn't, but kindness does. His words, though simple, carried the weight of something profound. Around them, other passengers nodded in agreement. The flight attendant, who had been near tears, now looked at Messi with gratitude. Elena had spent years building an empire, ensuring that she was always respected, feared even. But at that moment, in front of Lionel Messi and a cabin full of people, she realized that true greatness wasn't about power, wealth, or dominance. It was about humility. For the rest of the flight, she remained quiet, replaying the incident over and over in her mind. The embarrassment of her earlier confrontation at the gate had been one thing, but this was something else entirely. By the time they landed in New York, Elena had made a decision. As Messi collected his things and prepared to disembark, she stepped forward hesitantly. Mr. Messi, she began, her voice uncharacteristically soft. He turned to her, his expression neutral but not unkind. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I was out of line earlier, she admitted, swallowing her pride. And you were right. Messi studied her for a moment before offering a small nod. It takes a strong person to admit that, he said. Then, with an easy smile, he added, Besides, not everyone has to follow football. Elena let out a small, unexpected laugh, her tension easing. As he walked away, disappearing into the terminal with the effortless grace of a man who had nothing to prove, she realized that she had just learned one of the most valuable lessons of her life, not from a business deal or a high-stakes negotiation, but from a man who played a game she had never even cared about. And for the first time in a long time, she felt humbled. Elena walked through the airport in a daze, her heels clicking against the polished floor with less authority than usual. Her mind replayed every moment of the interaction with Lionel Messi, the way he had remained calm, the way he had subtly corrected her without a shred of arrogance, the way he had carried himself with a humility that was foreign to her world. She had spent her life working to be the best, to ensure she was never overlooked, never dismissed. Power was everything, and it was earned through dominance. Yet here was a man who, by all accounts, was among the most celebrated individuals on the planet, and he carried himself with none of the superiority she had always associated with success. He didn't need to flaunt his importance. He didn't need to demand recognition. It was simply given to him. As she walked towards the airport exit, her assistant, Mark, greeted her with a relieved sigh. Elena, I was worried you'd be late. The investors are expecting us in 2 hours. He reached for her carry-on, but she held on to it, still lost in thought. Elena? Mark prompted, sensing something was off. She snapped out of it. I'm fine, she said, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. As they stepped into the car waiting for them outside, Mark launched into a breakdown of their upcoming meetings, the key players involved, and what was at stake. Normally, Elena would absorb every detail, mentally preparing counterpoints, strategizing her approach. But today, his words felt distant. Mark, she interrupted suddenly, have you ever heard of Lionel Messi? Mark blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question. Yeah, of course. I mean, he's a legend. Even people who don't watch football know who he is. Elena stared out the window, the streets of New York blurring past. What makes him so special? She asked, genuinely curious. Mark tilted his head as if trying to gauge whether she was joking. When he realized she wasn't, he shrugged. Well, he's not just insanely talented, he's like the definition of hard work and dedication. Came from nothing. Had medical issues as a kid that could have ended his career before it even started, but he pushed through. And despite being one of the greatest athletes in history, he's still, Just messy, humble, down to earth. Elena absorbed this, feeling a strange sense of discomfort. Why? Mark asked. She hesitated. I met him on the flight. Mark's eyes widened. Wait, what? You were on the same plane as Messi? She nodded, choosing not to disclose the full extent of the interaction. I didn't recognize him at first. Mark let out a low whistle. Damn, that's a pretty big miss. She sighed. You have no idea. They arrived at the towering glass skyscraper that housed the firm they were meeting with. Elena straightened her posture, slipping back into her professional armor. The moment she entered the conference room, she was greeted with firm handshakes and eager smiles from the investors she had worked tirelessly to impress. For years, she had played this game flawlessly, commanding respect, securing deals, and ensuring her position at the top. But something felt different now. As the negotiations began, she listened intently, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't rush to assert herself. She observed, weighing not just the figures and technicalities of the deal, but the way people spoke to each other, the way they treated those around them. At one point, a junior associate, clearly nervous, fumbled with his notes while presenting key data. The senior partner beside him shot him a sharp look, clearly unimpressed. Before today, Elena might have done the same, might have scoffed, dismissed the slip-up, or cut in to speed things along. But now, she found herself doing something unexpected. She leaned forward. Take your time, she said simply. The young associate looked at her in surprise before nodding and regaining his composure. Mark, standing at the side of the room, raised an eyebrow at her subtle shift in demeanor. The meeting continued, and the deal was eventually closed successfully, but Elena found herself reflecting on what had truly mattered in that room. It wasn't just the figures, the technicalities, or the power plays. It was the way people carried themselves, the respect they showed, or didn't show, to others. That evening, Elena found herself scrolling through articles about Lionel Messi. She read about his childhood in Rosario, Argentina, about how he had been diagnosed with growth hormone deficiency and how his family had struggled to afford treatment. She read about how FC Barcelona had taken a chance on him, offering him a contract on a napkin, and how he had grown into a legend through relentless work and sheer passion. She watched videos of him playing, his agility, his vision, the effortless way he moved on the field, but what struck her most were the interviews. Time and again, journalists praised him, calling him the greatest of all time, comparing him to legends. And every time, Messi would smile, shift in his seat, and downplay the compliment. It's not just me, he would say, it's the team. Without them, I wouldn't be here. Elena set her phone down, staring at the ceiling of her penthouse suite. She had spent her life believing that power was something you seized, something you fought for tooth and nail. But here was a man who had more power, more influence than almost anyone on the planet, and he wielded it with grace. Over the next few months, something in Elena began to change. She didn't lose her sharp edge. She was still the same formidable businesswoman, still commanded the same respect. But her interactions shifted. She started paying closer attention to the people around her, the interns, the assistants, the flight attendants, the baristas who served her coffee. She no longer dismissed small mistakes with icy condescension. She no longer felt the need to dominate every room she entered, and in return, something unexpected happened. People responded to her differently. Her employees, who had once worked under her out of fear, now seemed to genuinely respect her. Her meetings, once tense battlefields, became more collaborative. Even Mark, who had been with her for years, took notice. I gotta say, he remarked one day, you've been different lately. She smirked. Different how? He shrugged. Less intense? More, I don't know, human? She chuckled at that. I'll take that as a compliment. Mark grinned. You should. I like this version of you. That night, Elena found herself watching another interview of Messi. The journalist had asked him about his legacy, about whether he cared about being remembered as the greatest. Messi had smiled, shaking his head. I just love playing football, he had said. Everything else is secondary. Elena closed her laptop, leaning back with a thoughtful expression. For so long, she had chased power, recognition, and dominance. But here was a man who had achieved all of it and more, simply by doing what he loved, and by treating people with kindness along the way. The next time she flew first class, she found herself observing the people around her, the flight attendants, the passengers, the way people interacted. When one of the attendants accidentally spilled a drink on another passenger, she braced herself for the inevitable tirade, only to watch as the man simply smiled and waved it off. "Don't worry about it," he said. "It's just a drink." Elena smiled to herself. Perhaps true greatness wasn't just about how high you climbed. Perhaps it was also about how you carried yourself along the way. Elena's transformation was not an overnight phenomenon. Change, especially one as fundamental as shifting one's worldview, was a slow and often subtle process. But something had been set in motion, something she couldn't ignore. For weeks after that flight, she found herself reflecting on the idea of humility, not as a weakness, but as a strength. It was strange how an interaction that had lasted mere minutes could shake years of ingrained beliefs. She had spent her life demanding respect, ensuring that no one overlooked her in a world dominated by men who rarely made space for women like her. And yet, Lionel Messi, one of the most powerful figures in the sporting world, had shown that true respect was not commanded through dominance but earned through character. One evening, after an exhausting day of back-to-back meetings, she decided to take a detour before heading home. There was a small cafe a few blocks away from her office that she used to frequent years ago, back when she was still rising through the ranks. She hadn't stepped foot in it in years. Her lifestyle had evolved beyond casual coffee stops. But tonight, she felt drawn to it. As she entered, she was met with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed espresso and the low hum of conversation. It was a stark contrast to the sterile high-end places she usually visited, where everything was about efficiency and exclusivity. Here, people lingered over their drinks, chatting, laughing, or simply enjoying a quiet moment. She ordered a cappuccino and found a seat by the window. As she waited, her eyes wandered around the room. She watched as a young man in a suit hurriedly typed on his laptop, occasionally pausing to take frantic sips of coffee. A group of friends laughed over a shared pastry, completely immersed in their conversation. A woman sat alone in the corner, reading a book, utterly at peace. Her coffee arrived, and she took a sip, savoring the rich, familiar taste. A memory surfaced. Years ago, she had sat in this very spot, poring over reports, fueled by the same cappuccino. She had been so desperate to make it, so determined to prove herself. And she had. She had climbed higher than she had ever imagined. But somewhere along the way, she had lost something. She had become so focused on winning that she had forgotten why she had started in the first place. The barista who had served her earlier was wiping down the counter when a man in a delivery uniform approached with an apologetic look. "Hey, I'm really sorry, but I think I left my wallet here earlier." The barista frowned and checked under the counter. "Let me see. Nope, I don't see anything. But I can check the back." The man sighed. "It probably fell out of my pocket while I was grabbing the coffee. Damn, I need that to get home." Elena watched as the barista, a young woman barely in her 20s, hesitated for only a second before reaching into her own pocket. "Here," she said, handing him a few bills. "This should cover your ride." The man looked shocked. "Oh, no, I can't take that." "It's fine," the barista insisted with a warm smile. "Just bring it back if you find your wallet." Elena felt something shift inside her. The gesture was small, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it struck her deeply. This young woman, who probably didn't make much, had given without hesitation, not because she had to, not because it benefited her, but simply because it was the right thing to do. She thought about all the times she had been in a position to help someone and hadn't, not out of malice, but out of indifference. She had been too focused on her own journey to notice the people she passed along the way. As the man left, promising to return the money, Elena found herself reaching into her purse. When the barista came to clear her table, she handed her a $100 bill. "For your kindness," Elena said simply. The young woman's eyes widened. "Oh, wow. Are you sure?" Elena nodded. "I'm sure." She left the cafe feeling lighter than she had in years. A few weeks later, she found herself invited to a high-profile charity event. Normally, these functions were an opportunity for networking, a place where the rich and powerful flaunted their generosity while subtly brokering deals over glasses of champagne. But tonight, as she moved through the lavish ballroom, she found herself paying closer attention to the cause itself. The event was raising money for children's sports programs in underprivileged communities. As she listened to the speakers talk about the importance of giving children opportunities, she couldn't help but think about Messi again, how he had nearly lost his chance at football because of something as simple as a medical condition his family couldn't afford to treat. Near the stage, there was a photo exhibit featuring children from different countries, each one holding a football with beaming smiles. A young boy, no older than 10, stood beside her, staring at the pictures with wide eyes. "You like football?" she asked, surprised at herself for starting a conversation. The boy nodded enthusiastically. "I love it. I want to be like Messi," she smiled. "He's a good one to look up to." The boy turned to her, his small face serious. "Do you think I can be as good as him someday?" Elena studied him. His shoes were scuffed, his jacket a little too big for him, probably a hand-me-down. She thought of how many talented children never got their chance, how easily circumstances could determine a person's fate. "You can," she said finally, "but you'll need to work hard." The boy grinned. "I will." That night, instead of simply writing a check like she usually would, she reached out to the program director. "I want to do more," she said. "I want to sponsor a program." The woman's eyes widened. "You mean—" "I want to fund training, equipment, and scholarships for kids who can't afford to play," Elena clarified. "I want to make sure they don't lose their chance before they even start." The director nearly burst into tears as she shook Elena's hand. "You have no idea how many lives this will change." As she left the event, Elena felt something she hadn't in a long time: fulfillment. Months passed, and the changes in Elena's life became more apparent. Her company continued to thrive, but she no longer ruled with an iron fist. She still demanded excellence, but she led with understanding rather than intimidation. One afternoon, as she sat in her office reviewing reports, Mark walked in, holding his phone with an expression of barely contained excitement. "You're not going to believe this," he said, showing her the screen. It was a video clip from a recent football match. Lionel Messi, in a post-game interview, was being asked about his inspirations. "There are many people who inspire me," he was saying, wiping sweat from his brow, "but sometimes it's the unexpected moments. A kind gesture, someone choosing to do the right thing, even when they don't have to. Those things remind me that we all have the power to make a difference." The reporter smiled. "That's a beautiful sentiment." Messi nodded. "I had an experience recently on a flight, a conversation that reminded me how much we can all grow. No one is ever done learning." Elena's heart stopped. Mark was grinning. "I swear he's talking about you." She laughed, shaking her head. "That's a stretch," Mark smirked. "Maybe, but either way, seems like you made an impression." As the video ended, Elena leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. Once, she had dismissed Lionel Messi as just another passenger standing in her way. Now she understood that he had, in a way she never could have anticipated, set her on a path she didn't even know she needed. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons. Some came through years of struggle, others in mere minutes. And sometimes, if you were lucky, you met someone who reminded you of the kind of person you truly wanted to be. As she gazed out the window at the bustling city below, Elena knew one thing for certain. She would never forget the day she almost dismissed greatness, and how, in doing so, she had found the courage to change. As Elena sat in her office, staring out at the sprawling city skyline, she couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed within her, not just in her approach to business, but in her outlook on life itself. She had spent years chasing success, convinced that power and authority were the only measures of achievement. Yet in a fleeting moment, a chance encounter had unraveled that belief, replacing it with something far more meaningful. Her assistant knocked on the door and stepped in. "Elena, your car is ready for the gala tonight." She had almost forgotten. Another high-profile event. Another evening spent mingling with the elite. But this time she felt different. She wasn't going there to flaunt her wealth or to make strategic connections. She was going because, for the first time, she genuinely cared about the cause being supported. The gala was being hosted by a foundation dedicated to providing underprivileged children with access to sports, an initiative she had personally begun funding in the months following her meeting with Messi. The room was filled with influential people, some of whom were simply there for the prestige, but others who had poured their hearts into the mission. As she entered, She was greeted by the foundation's director, a woman whose gratitude was evident in her eyes. Elena, I can't thank you enough for what you've done. The number of children we've been able to help has doubled because of your support. Elena smiled. But before she could respond, a small voice piped up from behind the woman. Miss Vasquez! She turned and saw the young boy she had met at the last event, the one who had told her he wanted to be like Messi. He was beaming, his face full of excitement. I started playing, he exclaimed. They put me in the program and I get to train every week. I even got real football boots. Elena knelt slightly to meet him at eye level. That's amazing. Are you enjoying it? He nodded vigorously. I love it and I scored my first goal last week. She grinned. That's incredible. Keep working hard. I will, he promised. Then with a serious look he added, one day I'm going to meet Messi and tell him I played because of him. Elena's chest tightened at the words. She ruffled his hair gently. I think he'd be really proud of you. As the night went on, she found herself reflecting on her own journey. The success, the ambition, the battles she had fought. She had believed that the pinnacle of achievement was standing at the top alone, untouchable. But now she understood something far greater. True success wasn't about power. It was about impact. And sometimes the most profound lessons came not from boardrooms or business deals, but from a single moment of humility. She had met greatness once. Now she wanted to spend the rest of her life striving to embody it. Elena stepped out onto the balcony of the grand gala venue, letting the cool evening air wash over her. The chatter and laughter from inside drifted out, mingling with the distant hum of the city. She took a deep breath, reflecting on how far she had come, not just in her career, but as a person. The night had been a success. The foundation had raised an impressive sum, and the energy in the room was electric with hope and possibility. But it wasn't just about the money. It was about the stories. The children who now had access to training, the families who no longer had to choose between putting food on the table and allowing their kids to chase their dreams. And in the midst of it all, a small boy had looked up at her with wide, earnest eyes and told her he wanted to be like Messi. Messi. His name had once meant little to her, just another celebrity in a world she had no interest in. Now it carried a weight she could hardly explain. He had no idea the effect he had had on her. No idea that his quiet presence on that flight had ignited something in her soul that she hadn't even realized was missing. And yet there it was, a new path, a new purpose. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Hiding from your own party? She turned to see Mark, her ever-loyal assistant, holding 2 glasses of champagne. He handed her one before leaning against the railing beside her. Elena smirked, just taking a moment. Mark studied her for a second, then said, You know, I've worked for you for a long time. I've seen you close impossible deals, win battles that no one thought you could win, but I've never seen you like this. She raised an eyebrow. Like what? He took a sip of his drink, then shrugged. Like someone who's actually enjoying the moment, not just conquering it. Elena chuckled. You make me sound like a warlord. Mark laughed. In a way, you always were. But tonight, you seem lighter? Lighter. That was an odd way to put it. She hadn't thought of it that way before, but perhaps he was right. For so long, she had carried the weight of expectation, of ambition, of the need to prove herself in a world that constantly challenged her authority. It had made her formidable, but it had also made her rigid. She had spent so much time pushing forward that she had never stopped to consider whether she was actually happy. But tonight, as she stood here watching people celebrate something bigger than themselves, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Fulfillment. She turned to Mark. You ever think about what we're really doing all this for? He gave her a knowing look. Are we having an existential crisis? She rolled her eyes. I'm serious. Mark sighed, considering her question. I think at the end of the day, we all just want to matter. To know that something we did made a difference. Elena nodded slowly. Yeah, I think so too. Mark tilted his head. So, what now? You're funding programs, mentoring kids. What's the next step in this grand transformation of yours? She thought about it. The truth was, she didn't know exactly. For someone who had spent her entire life planning every move meticulously, this new path felt strangely uncertain. But for the first time, she was okay with that. I guess I just keep going, she said finally. Keep learning. Keep figuring it out. Mark grinned. Who are you, and what have you done with Elena Vasquez? She smirked, taking a sip of her champagne. Wouldn't you like to know? They stood there for a moment, enjoying the quiet before heading back inside. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on a woman refusing Messi first class? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.